Welcome. I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel. Today we'll talk about the astrology of May 2023. First off, I wanted to say thank you to all of my patrons. I appreciate all of your support. If you would like to become a patron and get access to astrological, magical material and videos early, or in many cases exclusively, please visit patreon.com/Nina Griffin. At the highest tier, you can get access to my monthly ebook, Magical Elections, which teaches you how and when to make astrological talismans for a wide variety of purposes. To summarize May, it's going to be an active month with some fairly negative or intense themes. This doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad on a personal level, on an individual level, but I think that it will be largely negative on a collective level. I think that we should look at it as holding the potential for unpleasant collective feelings and experiences. We have a disruptive lunar eclipse and then followed by a new moon in the second half of the month that is quite unpleasant, and it has some challenging themes. In addition, we'll have Mars entering a new sign, and Jupiter will square Pluto, with Mars making a hard aspect to both Jupiter and Pluto at the end of the month. This is a very volatile combination that falls into place in the second half of the month, so that as we get closer toward the end of May, things are going to get a little bit lively, if you will. To recap April very quickly, we had a solar eclipse in Aries that was ruled by Mars in the sign of his fall, but the eclipse also conjoined Jupiter, so it was an aggressive, Marsy, explosive combination. And indeed, just a few hours after the eclipse, we saw the explosion of the SpaceX rocket occur. We also saw fighting break out in Sudan rather dramatically in the days leading up to the eclipse. I think that many other places the eclipse was less noticeable on this kind of macro collective level, but I suspect that the May eclipse and even that subsequent new moon will be much more noticeable generally, especially in the economic realm. In week 1 of May, May 1st, the Sun will conjoin Mercury retrograde at 11 degrees Taurus. This is the inferior conjunction of Mercury and the Sun, when Mercury becomes a morning star and the world slightly changes. Hidden matters start their march toward becoming public when Mercury exits the Sun's beams the following week. So because Mercury is retrograde, we may see something of a sudden exposure or coming out. Retrograde planets tend to bring suddenness or events that occur out of order or out of the normal range of things. So be ready for exposure or things coming out in an unexpected or jarring kind of way around May 1st. May 5th, we get a lunar eclipse at 15 degrees Scorpio. This eclipse is ruled by Mars, just like the solar eclipse 2 weeks prior. Mars is in the sign of his fall, and Mars themes around these eclipses will continue, so there are strong notes of conflict, warfare, and contention around this eclipse. The Sun in the eclipse is with Uranus, so especially on that collective level, as outer planets tend to have that strong collective sense, this is a disruptive eclipse with sudden and surprising events occurring around the time of the eclipse and later. I'll do a much more in-depth separate video that will be released first to patrons and then later to the general public. In the second week of May, on May 7th, Venus will enter Cancer. This is a lovely sign for Venus, even though she doesn't have major dignity by sign or exaltation in Cancer. She's generally considered to be very nicely positioned there because of the cold and moisture of the water sign of Cancer, matching nicely her own cold and moist nature. All things being equal, Venus is much more romantic now than she was in Gemini, much more sensitive, emotional, perhaps a little bit moody. But in general, it's a very strong and harmonious placement for Venus, and very often we get very interesting and creative new artistic creations coming out around the time that Venus passes through the sign every year. On May 10th, Mercury will have his morning rise out of the Sun's beams at 6 degrees Taurus. So when Mercury emerges from the Sun's beams, this usually happens with about 8 degrees separation from the Sun, when Mercury becomes visually apparent and is separated enough from the Sun so that the Sun's beams don't overwhelm Mercury's own light. This event for a planet is known as phasis in Greek, which means something like an appearance. It's a moment of empowerment and a dramatic debut from a planet coming into its own strength after being hidden away in the beams of the Sun for some time. Now note that even though Mercury is coming out of the rays here, he is still retrograde, so his effects will be a bit erratic and unpredictable. Nonetheless, he is having a rather dramatic, glamorous debut. In the third week of May, May 14th, we'll have Mercury going direct at 5 degrees Taurus. His stationary period is really just one day, so there's not kind of a lead up to stationing direct the way that we see with the slower planets. But whenever a planet goes direct, and Mercury is no exception, we get a great gain in strength. So Mercury now becomes much more like himself. He behaves a lot more predictably, a lot more smoothly. The medieval astrologer Abraham ibn Ezra said that a planet in its second station, going direct, is like one hoping for some matter, nor will his hope be disappointed. So there is this sense that here is someone who is looking toward a bright and hopeful future, and very likely their hopes will be fulfilled. So these are some of the kinds of events or the kinds of feelings that we might literally experience around Mercury's direct station. Planets stationing direct are moving towards strength. So given that Mercury is in Taurus, we're going to see mercurial changes or mercurial decisions being made in realms of real estate, control of land, but also issues concerning women, since Taurus, of course, is a feminine sign that is also ruled by a feminine planet, Venus. May 16th, Jupiter will enter Taurus, and there's a separate video forthcoming just about this transit. Jupiter entering Taurus represents a major shift in global as well as a personal focus for the coming 12 months. Jupiter is entering a Venus-ruled sign here, so it benefits women and LGBTQ rights and arts, and the artists tend to thrive. As well, produce from the earth tends to be abundant at this period just because Taurus is an earth sign. So it's really a major shift from Jupiter's passage through Aries, where Jupiter really spent 12 months in Mars's very warlike sign, inflating feelings of war, feelings of aggression, funding for activities of aggression. The very next day, May 17th, Jupiter, newly in Taurus at 0 degrees Taurus, will square Pluto in Aquarius. And this aspect historically can coincide with economic instability and volatility, sometimes lower prices of assets, especially as it relates to large sums of money. Jupiter rules assets and wealthy people, while Pluto governs huge sums of money and the institutions that handle it. There's a lot of overlap between the two planets on a monetary side. So both for Jupiter and for Pluto, it's really their first major aspect to a major planet in their new signs. So this period is worth watching carefully. However, Jupiter is moving very quickly now, so I think that the impact of Jupiter square Pluto will fade relatively quickly, and Jupiter will not remake that aspect by retrograde motion. Patrons can watch my forecast about the economy in 2023 for more details about this aspect and upcoming countervailing aspects. I'm specifically referring to Jupiter applying to conjoin the North Node in early June, which tends to be positive and may help cushion many of the negative impacts of this particular combination of Jupiter and Pluto. May 19th, we get a new moon at 28 degrees Taurus, so not an eclipse. We're out of eclipse season for now. This new moon is ruled by Venus, who is so harmoniously placed in Cancer, which is lovely. And we can tell that because of Venus's rulership, the themes are going to be ones that impact women, the LGBTQ community, and children because of the lunar connection of Cancer, but also artists and other Venusian people. The bad news is that this new moon is fairly close to Uranus, which on a collective level creates disruption. This new moon also happens right as Mars comes to an opposition of Pluto. And even though the actual new moon makes a harmonious aspect to the Mars-Pluto opposition, it's still present, it's imminent. And the Mars-Pluto combination can indicate violence and power plays. Don't forget, it's also squaring Jupiter, indicating financial drama. So the verdict for the 2 weeks following May 19th is that we get sort of an unpleasant, volatile fortnight with financial consequences falling on Venusian people and lunar people, often those who have the least power in society. So the next day, May 20th, Mars enters Leo, and it's a significant improvement for Mars, moving from the sign of his fall into one of the royal signs. Mars still lacks major dignity in Leo, so he's not going to behave at all well, but he may well have status because of the royal nature of Leo. So Mars will be immediately challenged, though, by the opposition to Pluto, and on May 22nd, the upcoming square to Jupiter. I suspect that this aspect and Mars's entry into Leo may be tied to the US debt ceiling discussions that are imminent. Mars, which by his nature supports things like cutting benefits, right? He likes to cut. He's about to run into what I think are the grinding teeth of the Jupiter-Pluto square, which symbolize wealth and really big money, people with enormous amounts of money and therefore influence. Jupiter is in an overcoming square to Mars, so in the Mars-Jupiter combination, Jupiter is going to overpower Mars, essentially. And frankly, not many things survive a Pluto opposition, so that doesn't bode for Mars from that angle either. I think that Mars's presence with Jupiter and Pluto will create panic and fear, but ultimately Mars ends up quite beaten up and does not end up in a good place after going through these aspects at the end of May. Again, with Jupiter applying to conjoin the North Node, I think that may help cushion a lot of the negativity around these ordinarily very volatile and challenging combinations. The last major aspect is going to be on May 28th, and the Sun at 6 degrees Gemini will square Saturn in Pisces. So after the drama of the previous few days, we get this somewhat heavy, difficult combination that generally lowers vitality and life. The Sun has to do, of course, with the vital spirit, with the soul, with life itself. And Saturn, well, Saturn has to do with depressing life and death and things like that. So luckily it's a relatively fleeting transit, but one that can have sort of depressive effects. It's best not to take it too seriously, knowing that it will come and go. Probably don't plan major parties around the day that this is going to happen, around May 28th, just because they may not be quite as festive, quite as wild and crazy as you may be hoping for. So to summarize, May is going to be an eventful month with a sting in its tail after the new moon in particular. We do get a chance to see Mars, Jupiter, and Pluto all strut their stuff in their new signs and take us into a new exciting phase of existence. If you haven't yet seen my whole year 2023 forecast video to get the larger picture, check it out. And of course, you can always subscribe to the Nina Griffin channel on YouTube to get notified when videos are released to the public. Thanks for watching. I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel.